Hello, everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Betty Sue O'Brien, and you're in way down in Mississippi, right? Mississippi.
Right
Great.
next door to New Orleans.
I always like to just give a little bit of background about how why am I speaking to these people? How did I meet them? That sort of thing. So at the moment, I've been doing a short series of videos on iridology. My main interest or background is Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, but iridology is something that I did for a very long time and it's always stayed with me. It's a great interest. And I recently just managed to finally get around to finishing my book on behavioral iridology. So I thought, as a kind of a cross pollination and promotion thing, I would just start sort of interviewing iridologists that interest me and their work and then get them on the show, have them talk about it. And it kind of just creates a general bustle of interest about iridology. So I'd recently been speaking to Kathleen Norris. I think I spoke to her last week, and she wholeheartedly recommended you. So I had a quick look on the internet to see what you're up to. Lots of books. She had your own iris map, and we've spoken briefly as well. So I thought, great, we'll get you on the show. So I've asked Betty Sue to come on just to talk about her work, what she's doing. Just give us a little bit of background about how you got interested in iridology.
Um, well, I have a long story, Andrew, before some people listening were born, but one of my sons, my second child, was born blue eyes. We know in iridology that very light-eyed people tend to have more allergies, more lymphatic issues, etc. And unlike my other two kids, he was always getting a cold or getting sick. And I found a lady up in the country that had raw goat's milk that just happened to be an iridologist and had studied with Bernard Jensen. And she was about an hour from me, and I would take him up there, and she would say, "Here, take these herbs." And, she'd look at his eyes, and she had a country accent. She'd say, "Your thyroid's is messed up," things like that. But she was very accurate, okay? She was good. And I loved her. And all through those years, she would say, "You need to get into this." Well, my undergraduate degree had been in dietetics. So I was already a foodie, interested in nutrition and food and health, and had been interested in helping my family with nutrition. And in about the 1990s, I got a set of slides on brown eyes from Dr. Bernard Jensen, and I got some information from a couple of other iridologists that were out there, and I just started playing around. I would look in my husband's eyes, he's in bed, and I go, "Oh, call 911. Oh my God. There's so much in there." Um, but anyway, all of that evolved into I started going to workshops, studied with Mickey Jones, studied with some different people. I challenged my main teacher was Dr. Farida Sharan. Now, Farida, she's written several books and a terribly brilliant person. And she got me excited about the chakras and breath work in addition to iridology. And so I was studying in Boulder in 2000 with her. And that's when I got my naturopath degree, was 2001 or two. And I've been president of the International Iridology Association and vice president. I've traveled to places like Sri Lanka, and so it's all led into a beautiful career of
Interesting,
nature.
you've been to Sri Lanka. That was one of my main teaching grounds for the Ayurvedic training. So that's interesting. Whereabouts in Sri Lanka were you? More in the
Well,
north?
can I recommend you call Therandu Ferrandez? Therandu's a fabulous iridologist in Sri Lanka. Um, well, we went all over, actually. We had a convention in the uh, capital city, but we spent a week touring the country, staying in boutique hotels way up in the mountains and visiting monasteries, and
Mm.
it was a wonderful experience. I want to go back.
It's an amazing place. Yeah, I was quite. It's handy if you get to know somebody local because obviously there's a lot that's off the tourist trap. One of the guys I was working with owned a gem mine, so we were lucky actually to go to his mine, and I actually went down into the mine, which was about the scariest thing I ever did in my life. But it's just all those things are there, but you don't necessarily see them. Of course, there's the sort of tourist on the surface, but it's a fascinating island. It's small, but there's a lot there, and it's quite
Well,
diverse between north and south.
well, our scariest thing, we were chased by a bull elephant,
Yeah.
and we're screaming bloody murder, and he's going, "Wah," like that. And anyway, we got away, but it was one of the scarier things in my life,
Um,
and one of the most fun.
Interesting. So Sri Lanka, so I think I know the gentleman you're talking about. I've seen him on Iridology around the world. I'm pretty sure because I
Yes,
kind
yes.
of try and catch those as much as I can. I think I may have seen him, but obviously Sri Lankans all quite hematogenic, dark brown eyed people. How are they kind of coping with that over there? Is there any kind of special techniques that they're using, or have you managed to? Because I know you're using sclerology as well. So is that a big factor in when you're looking at brown eyes? How do you overcome that obstacle?
Well, it's a big factor, but the combination of a good camera and a um a good camera and manipulation on the computer. I like to look at a person's eye, a living pulsing eye with the iriscope. I use just a little handheld, um, one of these,
Yeah, yeah.
to look and then get a picture. And sometimes by moving your light around, you can see so much more texture in a brown eye.
Mm,
So we talk about structure and color, and people used to think brown eyes had no structure because they were so heavily pigmented.
mm,
But now we know that there's a lot of structure there. You just got to find it. And
mm,
yes, sclerology is important, but I wouldn't say in Sri Lanka or India it's the major thing. I think they're still studying iridology and just getting lightening and brightening the pictures until you can really see,
mm,
unless they're a fully pigmented, like a neurogenic type,
mm,
in which case you wouldn't. But sclerology is all of those wonderful pointers, that
mm,
in Jack Tipp's work, he taught a lot more about, the closeness of the red lines to the eye, the brightness, the depth, and how they pointed to iridology. In fact, the book we wrote together was How Sclerology Clarifies Iridology.
mm,
So in dark-eyed countries, I think it's a good combination, really important to have that combination.
Interesting. Yeah, I was lucky enough to, when I was studying over there, I was lucky enough to work, I wouldn't say closely, but I spent some time with in Western, it would be ENT, so like ears, nose, throat specialist, but he was a surgically trained Ayurvedic doctor. So he was doing a lot, a lot of hearing problems, sight problems. And he introduced me to some of the classics over there. And the classic books talk a lot about ancient Ayurvedic surgery to do or around the eye. And one of the things that they mention in there is diagnosing from the eye. And of course, the minute I saw that, I thought, oh,
Oh,
is this like iridology? But it was not really. It was more to do with the color. They were interested in like the shade of brown, but it was more to do where the eye looked. So is the eye looking at you, or as a person looking up? Are they looking from side to side, or are they looking down? And from those, predominantly where they like to look tells you which dosha or type they are, and then that would be another indicator for diagnosing. So it's a fascinating study, and they were quite aware of the eye and the construction and how it was, well, as a mechanism, kind of how it worked, and they were doing these rudimentary things. So yeah, there's a big piece in Ayurveda about eye detection and early eye diagnosis, but of course not anything we would understand as iridology. But so it sounds like you had a great time there. You met a lot of interesting people, saw lots of interesting eyes.
well, almost all of the attendees were optometrists or ophthalmologists of some sort or the other. And
Mm,
they were very curious, very gracious. It was just a really, really good experience. Christos Miliankos was my roommate half the time when we were traveling because there were limited rooms, and he's another great iridologist and well, a Rayid practitioner as well. So
Did you
anyway,
introduce all of those aspects of iridology while you were over there? Were you talking about personality and physical, or kind of mainly physical?
well, we did. No, years ago when I started in iridology, it was almost forbidden to talk about the emotional components. It was all very physical iridology. And of course, Denny Johnson came along and disrupted their world by coming up with, a new map. And then they had said the iris changes and the iris changes. And then Denny said the iris doesn't change. And so they blackballed him from ever coming back again. And of course, then the next time he came to speak for the Iridology Association, he said, well, I think the iris probably does change. And it just stirring things up a bit. But that's what we need. We need to be doing more research about, how these things show up in our physical bodies. So,
I mean,
yeah.
what's your own interpretation of that? I mean, personally, I don't think the iris changes so much. I mean, we're talking about addition of color. I don't see anything disappearing from the eye. Certainly, I photographed eyes 20 years apart, and there's not one fiber of difference. However, color buildup has increased. You might see those psoric spots, or I get slapped on the wrist for calling them psora, but
Yeah, that's
pigment
the
patches.
old timey word.
I know,
Yeah.
I just love that word. It's great. But I mean, okay, so like pigment patches or freckles or however you want to refer to them now. So, of course, I've seen those form. I've seen blue eyes that have remained unpigmented for many, many years. And then suddenly in the 50th or 60th year, they get a dark, tarry black spot appear. So
Yeah.
stuff like that. But other than that, the sclera yellows thickens, I think, or greys with age. But I haven't seen anything. I've never seen anybody. You get people who say, "I did juice fasting. I did this. I did that." My once middle of the road kind of mixed biliary are now more like light blue. I've never seen anything like that.
I actually, strangely enough, I have seen that before, but only twice. And it was always with a mixed eye. My daughter went to school, got her master's in Colorado, and she started running half marathons and 5K races in a high altitude.
Hmm.
And she had been born and raised in southern Mississippi on the beach where it's very moldy and lots of trees and, different environment. And when she came home, I was like, whoa, her eyes looked almost blue. There was a brightening. Now
Mm.
she was 20 years old, she was very young and hadn't acquired, because what we say in iridology mostly is that the iris is accumulative
Mm.
but not dispersive,
Mm.
sort of like wrinkles. Once you get them, they're there. And that's how I look at the eye. You can tell something about the age of a person by looking at the iris and the sclera
Mm.
because you can see the pigmentations or the darkenings or the corneal arcus. You can actually see when a person is 80 years old that it's an
Mm.
older, just like wrinkles on the face. So
Mm.
I do believe it's primarily that way, but I also think it's because it is our genetic blueprint. We
Mm.
can't change our structure. If we did, then we couldn't use eyes to get us into buildings, for examples.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, the structural patterns are part of who we are.
Hmm.
And that's where, of course, the behavioral is so important
Mm.
because it shows that structure reveals certain personality and emotional activity
Mm.
traits that, you know, clinical iridology or physical iridology really doesn't really cover.
Mm.
And what I love about the emotions and behavioral and Rayid is that when I started out in iridology, I felt like I was giving everybody a bad report card. You know, it's like, oh, well, here, you've got this, and this. You better do this, and this. And once I learned about different personalities and how they learn and how they see and how they, speak and feel, I was able to say, oh, wow, you're a beautiful flower. This is so amazing, or whatever. I
Mm.
bet you're artistic.
Mm.
So even if you do give them some bad news, you've got some good news to give them with it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've something similar. Teaching students. I mean, as part of the diagnostics course in Ayurveda, one of the tutors suggested introducing iridology. He said, I know it's nothing to do with Ayurveda, but just for fun, really, for the students to sort of just see that you can actually, I mean, Ayurveda uses everything, right? So it looks at the shape of the hand, the lines on the hand, even the kind of palmistry. So it's just physical observation. So the eye is just something else that we can observe. And I always find that when we get onto that as a teaching module, just a very short introductory, they love it. Of course, they warm to the physical, but they love the behavioral because it's almost like it's really them, the physical stuff they can kind of get into, but obviously that requires a good, you need a fairly detailed assessment of where things are in the eye and also relating to the organs and the body systems. But then behavioral, it's kind of more blanket, isn't it? Once you've established that it's more like an emotional type or more like a thinking type, it gives you a lot of latitude, and then you can kind of move from there and look at other traits. And I always find they absolutely love it. Students get really excited about it. So, and of course, it's a very easy thing to observe, isn't it? Like you say, you just need the loop and the light, and you can start looking.
Yeah. When I teach a little class sometimes in person, and I call it Iridology self-analysis. And I just take a bunch of mirrors and, scopes, and they look at their eyes and they look at other people's eyes, and everybody's just having so much fun with it. But I always start with the behavioral
Mm.
aspects of it, because if you just identify the major types, of course I use Rayid, but it's a similar
Same thing.
principle,
Yeah.
same thing. And when you talk to them about particularly partnerships, like if you say, this type does well with this type, and they go, oh, can you look at my husband's eyes, because I'm pretty sure he's the wrong type for me, or he's, whatever. And people love that.
Yeah.
Or even, this is my best friend, how do we go together, And I was looking at someone's eyes in one of those classes, and it's like, this one had a big lacuna, what we call it in iridology, or a flower in the area of nurturing, indicating they would be nurturing. And then the other partner had a big pigment there, or a jewel, meaning
You nearly said Sora, didn't you?
yeah, I did. I know. It's ingrained in us. And some of us, I have a 95-year-old friend who still does iridology. And he's so much fun, and so much fun to talk to, sharp as a tack. And he says, I don't see any reason to change my old terminology. It's been working for me for 40 years. And, so I'm just going to keep calling them Soras.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I like the homeopathic idea behind it as well. It's that idea of like it's the scabies miasm, isn't it? It's like skin, it's like itchiness, it's like constantly agitated, which I think really sums up like a thinking type. And the big flowery patterns are like tuberculine, and they're really sort of like all chesty and like, grief and sadness all around the chest. So just think those homeopathic terms work really well.
Yes. Yeah, they do. I mean, it all fits together. And then the miasms, could fit in with that too. Have you looked at the doshas and the eye types, and does that fit or not?
Yes. I mean, you could make more of a, well, it's like anything, isn't it? It's like trying to map any model on top of it. I mean, I think it's interesting you brought this up. I always felt that Rayid leans heavily towards Chinese. I remember some of the classes I attended with Denny, and he would always he'd use a lot of Chinese terminology like yin and yang, and those kind of like the metals and the wood, all these kind of elements would be brought into it. So I've always felt that it worked well with that system. Of course, you've got the humoral system where you've got four, so that would be good for the stream flower shaker.
Mhm.
I can't remember all my types now. So it's the stream and it's the shaker, then it's the flower and the jewel, isn't it? So
Right.
that would might map well on that. Well, doshas you've only got three, but I use three structural elements in the eye. So the pigment patch to me relate more to fire. So that would be like a pitta, because pitta is all about
Mhm.
colorations, particularly like reds and oranges. And then for vata, it's like empty spaces and things that move, it's openness. So that would be more like a lacuna, a space.
Yeah.
And then the fibers, if they're compact and very, very tight, that could be more like kapha, because that would be a high resistance type. And, kapha bodies are they're slow and hard to change, but they're quite resilient. So you could say like open fibers would be more like Vata, closed fibers would be more like Kapha. So yes, it could work. It's not, I couldn't say that I could look in an eye and say, right, that's definitely that dosha, but you might see some connection to that. So it's a loose, it sort of works in a way.
We need you to write an article for our newsletter on that, just to explore it. I think
I
people would
mean,
find it fascinating.
so many people have tried that. I mean, a friend of mine is a Unani specialist, so he's doing the Greek Arabic medicine. Of course, he uses the four temperaments, and that works quite well. You could almost really align those to those four
Oh,
Vedic
yeah.
types, so that would work quite well. So it depends on your humoral model, whatever you're finding to work.
Well, I did this talk in, where did I do that? In California at the Naturopath Conference this year on the microcosm and the macrocosm. And, when just everything that we do really boils down to it is the same in some way, some are just more like, for example, in Ayurveda, it's thousands of years of research and, anecdotal and scientific. With iridology, it's just been kind of hit and miss. And it's really only been in the last couple of centuries that people have been delving into it. And still, it's so fringe,
Mm,
in the scientific community. And, having come from a science background, because I had to take all those chemistries and biologies and all those to be a dietitian, um, it's like people want this absolute proof. But I say iridology is both a science and an art.
definitely.
It's not a pure science. It's an art because all of us bring something different to the table when we look at a set of eyes.
Mm.
So,
When you're assessing, so somebody comes in to see you, what's your kind of main, do you start to try and guess what you might see before you look in their eyes, or do you maintain a completely open mind until you look? How do you kind of assess? Or using any other techniques? Are you looking at kind of like body shapes or the way that they talk, or what's your kind of your assessment technique?
yeah, I think all of that, just like years ago when we were first studying Rayid, I think look at body type and movement and you say, oh, that's probably a jewel, probably neurogenic, and look at this shape of the body and, the way they move or their assertiveness or so. Yeah, I mean, there is that just like a little quick, you know, thinking about it, a summation. Of course, like everybody, I mean, you look at their fingernails, or their hands, or are their fingers clubbed, or just. I don't go into doing a lot with the tongue or even face reading. I do a little bit,
Mm,
but mostly, I think because of the naturopathy background, my tendency is more toward practices that
mhm,
are going to help them based on their constitutional type.
mm,
And so, like, if someone really needs to move the lymph, then I'm going to be working with them on how to gently do your lymph massage, how to bounce every day, things like that, more, I guess you could say generalized.
mm. And how about like dietary? I mean, obviously you've got a background in the dietitian as well, so you understand all that. I mean, how much of that is involved in what you do? Does that play a big? I mean, I'm not really au fait with kind of naturopathy. I mean, it covers many disciplines, isn't it? There are many things under the naturopathy umbrella. So, what would be the main the
Yeah.
main therapy?
Um, well, I have gotten fixated at different times, and I just see it over and over and over of using an antifungal eating program. Um, Probably with half the people that I see in one way or the other, because it doesn't matter whether they have cancer or toenail fungus, or a meningioma in the brain, that these all can be fungal related. And the only way that I've found to deal with SIFO or SIBO, which is small intestinal
Mhm,
fungal or bacterial overgrowth, is to starve them.
mm,
You can take all the herbs and medicines in the world and you can find out that you had a problem, but
mm,
it's usually going to come back on a vibrational level because they're in our body to digest our flesh when we die. So I do focus on that with a lot of people, it feels like, and sometimes I try to, you know, not go there, but I find that it works for me in a lot of areas where people actually feel better by limiting their diet for a short period of time to see if that's really their problem.
Yeah, I remember reading old Dr. Jensen's books back in the sort of 90s, all about these, at the sanitarium where people were coming in and they were like fasting for, I mean, it was pretty extreme, some of them, but I mean, it's quite
Oh,
amazing
yeah.
the results he was getting just by literally clearing the decks, so to speak, and allowing the digestion to settle down and sort of cleanse and then rebuild them, which are all very sort of traditional therapies from around the world, isn't it? You're either
Yes.
repairing and building or you're cleansing and releasing. So, I mean, I like that basic approach.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of giving your digestion a rest, I mean, that's what's behind all this intermittent fasting. Um, I'm not a big intermittent fasting person, but if it works for someone, some people just do it naturally because it fits for them. Other people are starving, when they haven't eaten since 6 and it's 10:30 or 11 in the morning, and I said, life is too short, eat an hour earlier, or, you don't have to punish yourself.
Mm.
I don't find fasting is a punishment. Most people, after a day or two, they feel better and they feel good, as long as they're getting plenty of fluids,
Mm.
or juice fasting. So, but, as iridologists, we're not supposed to diagnose. That's the idea, is that we are just supposed to assess.
Mm.
And what I've come to understand is that the iris is, to me, it's like our epigenetics. It's like, what is our potential, our health potential?
Mm.
And like in iridology, we teach that the neurogenic, real close fibers are stronger than the people that have connective tissue or open fibers. But I don't find that to be true. I find that the closed fiber people push themselves so much that they die younger many times because they can, they just can go and go and go and go and go. And then they just drop dead when they're
Mm.
60, the day they retire. And then you've got these kind of floppy connective tissue people that are laying on the couch and they're kind of heavy and they get to be 75 and they still haven't lost any weight
Mm.
and they're doing fine. So I think a lot of it is balance. And
Mm.
of course, that's what Ayurveda is all about, is trying to bring people back into balance. So when I was younger and studied with Dr. Jensen, I was very much into detoxing and cleansing.
Mm.
And now my understanding is that the way I look at it is, it's like if you have a liver problem, like a fatty liver, and your liver's supposed to go like this, well, it starts going like this, it's sluggish, it's not going well.
Mm.
Well, then we go out here and we get some milk thistle. And here's milk thistle over there. It's just going away at the really great rate that a liver would go at. And so then we introduce it into this body, and pretty soon they're entrained.
Mm.
And no pharmaceutical can do that.
Mm.
So, but flower essences, homeopathics, herbs, and oils, I feel like can increase the frequency or balance the frequency. It might even be slowing it down.
You developed that. So I know there was people were looking into it to matching up various flower essences with the different sort of types. Is that something you've looked at? Or I know Kathy was speaking about using oils like aromatic oils and different constitutional types as well. Is that something that you've looked at or explored?
I haven't, but I've actually thought about it. I was thinking about doing more. I mean, I do in a sense, but I'm not a full-on flower essence practitioner. I have all of them and
Mm.
I give them to people, but we usually go through a quiz or, look at the manual and kind of isolate what their issue is and then come up with a formula for them.
Mm.
Um, but I think it would be really an interesting study for iridology to do more in that way.
Mm.
And I use all, naturopaths just use all the things in the toolbox when they need them. And through the years, I've done a lot more with energy tools like Rife. I have a Rife machine,
Oh,
a
right.
chi machine, a sauna, a near infrared and a far infrared sauna. Um, so just all the things that right now, one of my sons has a tumor, and he's in his 40s now. And so I suggested an antifungal diet and maybe looking at some hot and cold. I was telling him how the Germans, way back in the 19th century, were doing, you know, cold treatments and hot treatments. And anyway, he has a mark in his eye in the brain area. And
Mm.
of course, he didn't listen to me, but then he went to Colorado and someone told him to do that. And
Oh,
so he said, "You won't believe this really worked." I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah, that's quite a popular technique in there's a releasing technique they use in Ayurveda to remove deep-seated toxins, and it involves kind of heating, steaming the body, and then letting it cool, like baths, and then steaming, and then massage. And the idea is, they say it's like a stick. If you try to bend a stick and it's dry, it literally just snaps. But if you oleate it and steam it and prepare it, it becomes quite flexible. So it's analogous to the channels in the body being rigid and not able to release. And by this heating and cooling method, you kind of flex and you introduce like elasticity into everything. So it enables the flow out of the body. I mean, it's a kind of a mechanistic old way of looking at things, but it works. I've seen these things
Yes.
work. People who are doubled up with arthritis, they go through these treatments and they can literally sort of bend their leg over the back of their head. It's like quite
Yes, yes. And I have seen that too, but with great results. And it is an old treatment, but sometimes I don't know if you're familiar with Back to Eden, Jethro. It's one of the old naturopath books where he would, like Linlar, where they would
Mm,
go
I was
out
going to say
to
Lindner, yeah.
houses and do house calls and stay with the people while they were putting hot mustard baths and cold sheet treatments, and they were basically doing the same thing,
Mm.
and it's just been rediscovered um, with some of the breath workers and some of the extremists in the physical fitness world, really,
Mm.
is I think where a lot of this has been rooted in modern times anyway.
Well, if it works, it works, doesn't it? We'll always come back to the same things, diet, lifestyle, de-stressing. These things all play a massive part. Of course, medicines are important, but there's so much more, isn't it? We were always taught Ayurvedically, you need three things for a cure. You need a good physician, a good medicine, but most importantly, you need a good patient.
Oh, yes.
Patient doesn't comply, it's all for nothing. So,
That is so true. Well, my sister is an herbalist too. She's a has a master's in chemistry, but she is a great herbalist and able to mix up essences and oils and things in a beautiful way. And her bottle says, "Herbs only work if you take them."
brilliant. I like
That's on her label.
that.
Because people say it didn't work, and you go and there's only this much gone, of a bottle that's 8 ounces.
Wow. Isn't
So
that?
how do you know it didn't work?
So could I noticed you've got your iris map in the background there. So can you talk a little bit about you're kind of unusual because you've got your own iris map, which I think is really great. I mean, I think it's nice, like we were saying earlier, it's good if you develop your own or something you see in there which is very important for you. So you've obviously developed your own map, and I know that ties in with your. There we go. I was just going to say it's in your book. There we go. Fantastic.
And I have a little story about that. Whoop, let me get that straight. About a little about this map. Um, and on the back, I really have I have what affirmations, what colors, in the little book that accompanies it, what flower essence, what oil, for the different chakra areas
Mm.
based on the colors that are in the chart. Um, but when I did this chart, it was an inspiration created by Daniele Larito
Mhm.
from Italy. I had had a session with him somewhere. I think it was in Las Vegas. We were at a conference, and he was doing time risk iridology with me, and I he takes you through a trance, and so I kind of got stuck somewhere. And he said, "Do you see? There's a rainbow. Do you see the rainbow?" And he said, "I want you to just ride across that rainbow and come back here." And he said, "From this day forward, you are going to see a rainbow in every person that you meet." That was what he said to me. And I mean, I went back to my room and I was like thinking, I'm going to find this in people's eyes because it's there. You know, we know it's in their bodies.
Mm.
And anyway, so that's how, and so for a long time, I was just doing energy iridology, just looking at, like I might say to someone who was having third chakra issues, that's the yellow color, you
Mm.
know, the third chakra, that's where the liver and the kidneys and the pancreas and the spleen, all of that's in that area. And I would ask uh, is there something in your family that you feel like you're not being able to express your own willpower, because this is like the center of your total will? And they would just burst into tears and say, "Well, my husband's a control freak, and you know, he won't let me go out with my friends or whatever." Ah! And I started thinking, well, you know, there's really something to this. And so it's just been experimental, but that I find that when I get to that, then if I give them some lemongrass oil or something that's in that color spectrum,
Mm.
and then I have a proton light stimulator, which has a crystal with a yellow light on it.
Mhm.
And I can use that on the chakra to balance it as well.
Mm. So if you look at a pair of eyes, so how is this working? I can see obviously we got the color spectrum from the sort of the purples at the top down to the yellowy reds at the bottom. So are you looking at it in terms of markings and areas of chakra, or is it just it doesn't really matter what markings are in that area, that you're just seeing that those areas are relating to those
Right.
centers?
Yeah. It doesn't matter whether it's a jewel or, you know, whether it's, I'd say pigment, because I think pigments are not necessarily acquired. I think they're still genetic. They're in the pattern. They're just waiting to be born, so to
Mm.
speak. And in our, as who has it that says our biography becomes our biology,
Mm. Yeah,
you
like
know? Yeah. And so somewhere along the line, uh, I've seen it, like this one client I have had for years had a very clear pioneer type eye, you know, with no markings in it at all. And she came in and she had a kind of a orangey mark in the reproductive area.
mm.
And I found out that she had just acquired the HPV virus.
Mm.
Well, there must have been a weakness there, because the virus, a lot of people are exposed to viruses and they don't manifest in their bodies,
Mm.
but it brought it out, like to show us, look, there's something going on here.
Mm. Interesting.
I liked another thing, Dr. Jensen, I think, was the one who said it. I'm not sure, but um, that pigments might be a way of protecting, just like pigment on our skin, a
Mm.
darker pigment protects us from the sun,
Mm.
that it could be like a form of protection
Mm.
to have a heavier coating in that area. So
Yeah,
brings less.
that's something I'm really agreeing with. I mean, I'd had I think I put in my book an example of so it's an iris that had it was somebody working with some foundry with hot metals, and a little spark flew out, hit the cornea. It was so hot, it actually stuck to the cornea, a tiny little piece, like a little tiny piece of hot ash, but it stuck on there for a couple of days. And then the normal washing process of the eye just released it, and it left a sort of a scar. It scarred the cornea slightly. If you got it in the light, you could see this like very small indentation, but underneath on the iris it discolored, it went yellow. And over a long period of time that kind of like retracted a little bit, but it stayed. So even though there was no physical contact between the iris and this hot spark, the iris still reflected something had happened above it. So there's some
Oh,
kind of connective force, so it got me thinking about, they could just be stimulated by experiences. We're looking at stuff all the time, aren't we? If something's coming into the eye, it could be impressing itself upon certain. I mean, there's many theories about how it's formed and what causes it. I've seen photographs online where you've seen a psoriatic spot or a pigment patch gradually grow over time. You see it accrete
Yeah.
over a number of years, and there's other things where, like the older person I was talking about, blue eye with no pigment, and then literally within after 50, a black tarry spot just appeared
Mhm.
from nowhere. So how did that, that would take time to accrete, and yet it just happened really quickly. So it's interesting. There must be lots of different ways that these pigments can
Right.
aggregate on the eye.
Well, some people call these nurture points, when you see them, it's kind of a nice thing other than saying a sore spot or whatever. Um, but I think a dark spot or a colored spot um, would be more like a cold needing nurturing. And then you have a hot spot, which would be white and raised fibers, and it would be needing calming,
Mm,
nurturing, both needing nurturing, but in different ways.
mm.
And I kind of work with that a lot, to think, well, we need to shore this up or we need to nurture this area. So
Yeah, you
it
can
should,
definitely start to weave these amazing stories. Once you understand a little bit more about the positions and then maybe the organ motions associated with various organs. I know that's another part that people have looked at and explored. So, there's a lot of information there potentially. It just needs decoding. So,
yeah,
I was going to ask you, have
yeah.
you integrated any of I know I interviewed Chris the other day and he was talking, obviously he's using the Rayid model and he loves working with the birth order at all. Do you integrate any of that into what you're doing or?
Oh yeah, I do a lot with birth order. I do everyone's birth order. One of the first things I find out about them and to look at which family they fell from and kind of what's going on there and that genetic pattern.
Mm,
Just as a something to look back at so you can kind of remember,
mm,
oh, well, this is a one girl,
mm,
and there's her father's mother. Oh, she's a university professor. Oh, her father's mother was a superintendent of schools. Oh, you start just seeing everything, not just the patterns are deep in
mm,
birth order. They're very deep. They're much deeper than just, oh, you look like your grandfather.
mm. Yeah, it's a
They're
fascinating system. I remember when got sort of introduced to that in one talk, and it's just because you kind of get used to doing the eye stuff, and you suddenly, oh my God, it's like a whole other system on top. I mean, of course, they mesh together beautifully, but it's still another system, and it's a lot of extra information to remember. And I never really perhaps got into that as much as I should, but it's something that's always interested me, and I like to see the how it works. And like you say, it's good to sort of just, but it can get difficult with family structures sometimes. Like missing, died early, a surrogate, an adoption, something like that, and then it gets all a lot more complicated to sort of try and work out where everybody is. So,
Yeah. Well, my husband was adopted, and Jim Burgess looked in my husband's eyes 40 years ago or 30 years ago, and he said, "Were you adopted?" And we're like, "How did you know that?" From behavioral, or Rayid, I guess back then he
mm,
was practicing. But he never met his father, and he's a great golfer. My husband has a lot of hole in ones and different stuff, or two hole in ones and one tournaments. We meet his doctor when my husband was 69 years old, met his father, who was in his 90s, who owned a golf course, who
oh
had
wow,
had five
okay,
holes in ones, and he'd never met him in his whole life.
wow.
And his parents were like, "How did you know how to do that?" His adoptive parents.
I wonder why Jim said that. I should say this is Jim Burgess. So he's the sort of pioneer behind the behavioral model, but previously Rayed. So and he was very good at birth order as well. So maybe it was like his body type or something. He had the wrong body type for what he was expecting. That's why he said, "Are you adopted?" Because he was expecting something else, or I don't know.
Probably right now I can't remember, but that was one of the things. And people that do birth order, and they also get into what side of the bed are you sleeping on, Ray, and all of those things. And I'm not smart enough to use it all. I'm a naturopath, so I use what I think people need right now, and that I just pull it from your toolbox.
Mm,
But I always use iridology.
mm.
I may not do a full-on iridology appointment, but I always do use iridology unless people specifically don't want it. Get a picture of their eyes and have it as a record.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people I know, kind of practitioners doing different systems, some Ayurvedic, some Chinese, and same kind of thing. They have their sort of tools that they use all the time, but the system can do so much more. So, for instance, a guy I know he's very good at Chinese medicine, but particularly pulse taking. And he said you can do the conventional pulses, but he said there are sub pulses, so you can go down below. So then what you're doing is you're going into like a previous incarnation or traumas that have been carried over from the next life. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And of course, that's highly subjective, because you're kind of like relying on your intuition to work with it. But it's interesting that all those systems are still taught. There are people out there that specialize in. So I see iridology as a little bit like that. On its surface level, we could use it quite superficially for maybe just looking at basic constitutional typing. Then we can look at the organs, but then you can go so much deeper as well. It's a very multifaceted tool.
Yes, and it is fun and interesting when you get someone like we talked about Therendu from Sri Lanka, who's an optometrist. He developed a program, using the iris for detecting kidney function, and he does a lot of research into some of the way the medical model could utilize iridology. And I think in the future, there will be certain uses of things like iridology more.
You come back in 100 years' time and find that all the doctors are using iridology, and they say,
exactly,
of course it works. Why wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We've been using this for years. But everyone, when I first started, thought I was some sort of a magician or a crystal ball reader or something, and they wouldn't want to tell me anything. I just want to know, what do you think? What do you see? And now I tell them, look, our time is limited, so I'm going to tell you a couple of things, and I need some feedback from you, because we want to really look at what's going on and how we're going to get to the cause of it. Because even the eye, it reveals so much information. It's very difficult to hone in on three things.
Yeah, definitely. How do people go about? I guess we should just talk about your books briefly, because you've written quite a lot of material. I was surprised when I saw how many books you've written. So do you want to maybe just talk us through the books that you've done? That would be interesting, just to have a quick look at those, and then maybe some contact information, how people get hold of you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was going to find my author page, but I didn't. This was the first book I did, and I did it with Jack Tips, and it's How Sclerology Clarifies Iridology. And that was so much fun for me. I was getting my master's in sclerology at that time. And so that's really, and in my Sclerology 101 class that I teach through the Southern Institute of Natural Health, this is the book that we use, along with a lot of slides and things from other sclerologists, not just from Jack Tips.
Okay.
And then my best-selling book, and it's used by a number of schools, but other people buy it, is the Iridology textbook.
Yeah, I saw that. So that's a textbook recommended by IPRA if you're studying the course, yeah?
It's not, no, there are many different ones. A lot of teachers have their own, but I have a lot of teachers who don't have their own, who use this one.
Okay.
But other people have written their own books. IPA has a syllabus and a curriculum, but you can use your own material.
Okay.
So it's a book with a lot of pictures of irises and scleras and things like that in there. And it's in Spanish and in English.
Okay.
This is a book that I wrote. It's a manual for naturopathy. It's a holistic health practitioner manual.
Okay.
And it's 12 modules based on 12 different books. So that's another one.
Okay.
And then I showed you this one earlier, Andrew. This is the little booklet. These are all on Amazon, by the way.
Okay.
And this one is called Iridology, Color, Light, and the Chakras. And it has essences and oils and affirmations and things for each of these areas of the eye where something really stands out predominantly. And then this is another one. I don't know if you knew about this one. This one has all my crazy adventures with outer space, like I really think I'm an alien because I've left my body a few times. And this tells about some of that stuff along with the chakras.
So do
So
those the two chakra books normally go together? You'd recommend reading both of those for.
no, that they're really quite separate. They're quite
Okay.
different. One's just about mainly about iridology, and the other one is really about how I got into chakras and how the color and light work and all that.
Okay.
And then this one was an early book that I teach in my holistic health classes as an introduction because it's a basic introduction into natural living, like cleaning products should you use, what personal products, what energy can you do on yourself, how
Mm.
to keep your body in a more alkaline or balanced state, that kind of thing. So,
100 rules for a balanced life, that kind of thing.
yes, exactly. It's
Wow, that's
six
quite
weeks.
prolific. That's not a bad crop of books. So, I mean, having written a few books, I know how much effort it takes to write. So that's pretty good. You've done all right.
Well, as my husband says, you will do something when you have no idea how it's going to turn out. And that's the only way we can go about it because we really don't know whether anybody's going to be interested in it or not. We just do it because we want to do it, I think.
So how do people go about getting hold of you? What's the best for you? You've got your website. How do you prefer contact? People just come through the website and then fill out a contact form if they want to
Yeah,
speak.
there's a form on bettysueobrien.com. There's a form there, and it goes to um, a Google sheet, and I try to check that every couple of days so I can respond to people who are contacting. And there's also on that website, there's a free download of, I have a smoothie book. I didn't show y'all that one, but it's a book that I had out in a hard copy for years, but I redid it and I have it on my website as a free, download. So it's a
Okay.
free PDF. So, and it has smoothies based on body system. So they're food smoothies. They're not always the most tasting ones. They're like if you're healing and you need help,
Mm.
there's one for cancer, there's one for digestion, there's one for the respiratory system, et cetera, for nourishment.
Yeah. So it's not just general consumption. It's for a specific ailment.
Right. And then in the back, I have smoothies for kids, and I tell everybody just start there because the other ones don't taste as good.
All the chocolate banana at the back and all the sort of the bitters are
Yeah,
all.
right. Work your way up as your taste buds get adjusted to all the
Cool.
things you put in there.
And you've got your people want a copy of the Irish chart. You actually sell that on the website as well. So I saw you had that in there. So just go to the website and have a look around. Lots to see, lots to look at.
And
And
my Facebook is Betty Sue Says. And I'll tell you how I came up with that. When I would go on these trips with girlfriends, I would tell them all these things. They go tell their husband what he had to do, and they would say, "I don't care what Betty Sue says. I'm not drinking that."
so is this something you join? Is it a group on Facebook? You actually join?
It's just a Facebook. It's one of my pages. I don't know
Right.
if you join or not. I think you just follow it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Didn't
it's
know whether it
just
was like a sort of group page or something like that, and you had to
yeah,
join it. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on the channel and speaking to us. And I'm sure people will be in contact if they want more information. And I'll go back through this afterwards and I'll put up some pictures and the links. And so people will get a sense of, they can connect easily. They can just follow the links and the slides, but I think it'll be all there for them. So, yeah,
Great.
fantastic. Thank you.
All right.